The call came at midnight, while I was elbow-deep in the guts of my Triumph Bonneville, grease under my fingernails and the taste of betrayal still fresh in my mouth from 3 hours earlier. "You ready for the fireworks, Dorian?" Ray's voice crackled through my phone speaker, positioned precariously on my workbench between a socket wrench and an empty beer bottle. I wiped my hands on an old shop rag, the kind that had seen better decades, and considered the question. Was I ready? Hell, I'd been ready since the moment Lydia walked into that boardroom this morning wearing her power suit like armor and that smile that could cut glass. "Define ready," I said, settling back against my motorcycle. The garage was my sanctuary, the one place in this oversized house where Lydia never ventured. Too dirty for her manicured sensibilities. Ray chuckled, that low rumble that reminded me why we'd been friends since our Army intelligence days. "Ready as in, your lovely wife just signed the papers making her CEO of Fairchild Ventures. Ready as in, she thinks she owns your company now." I had to laugh at that. The irony was too perfect. Lydia Fairchild, soon to be ex-Fairchild if I had anything to say about it, had always been brilliant at reading people, just not brilliant enough to read the fine print on corporate documents, or to realize that her husband of 8 years had been 3 steps ahead of her for the past 6 months. "She can have the title," I said, reaching for my beer. "Titles are just words. Control is something else entirely." Spoken like a true majority shareholder. 71% to be exact. Not that anyone knew except Ray, my lawyer, and the Delaware incorporation documents filed under a shell company name that would make Lydia's head spin if she ever bothered to trace it. Which she wouldn't, because Lydia had always been too arrogant to imagine anyone could outmaneuver her, especially not her husband. "So what's the play?" Ray asked. "You want me to dig deeper into her boyfriend's finances?" Travis Monroe, sales VP, former college quarterback, current thorn in my side and occupant of my wife's bed for the past 4 months. I'd known about their little arrangement since week 2, thanks to Ray's surveillance work and Travis's unfortunate habit of booking hotel rooms on his company credit card. "Not yet," I said. "Let them celebrate first. Let Lydia enjoy her corner office and her victory champagne. Tomorrow morning, she'll start making decisions as CEO. By tomorrow afternoon, she'll realize she doesn't have the authority to make any decisions at all. You're enjoying this?" I was, more than I probably should have been, but 8 years of marriage to someone who viewed me as a stepping stone to Daddy's company had a way of hardening a man's heart. Lydia had married me because Edwin Fairchild, the legendary general himself, had taken a liking to his daughter's boyfriend. What she'd never understood was that the general hadn't just liked me. He'd respected me. Enough to structure his retirement in a way that left real control in my hands, not hers. "She thinks I'm just the pretty boy she married to impress her father," I said. "Tomorrow she finds out what happens when you underestimate someone with an intelligence background and a very long memory." Ray was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted into the tone I remembered from our deployment days. Serious, focused, ready for action. "You sure about this path, Dorian? Once you start, there's no going back. Lydia's not going to just roll over and accept defeat." I looked around my garage, at the motorcycle I'd restored piece by piece, at the tools arranged with military precision, at the small framed photo of my father tucked between spare parts on a shelf. Dad had been career Army too, before a heart attack took him at 55. He'd taught me that sometimes the only way to deal with people who mistake kindness for weakness is to show them exactly how wrong they are. "She wants a war," I said. "She's about to get one." After Ray hung up, I stayed in the garage for another hour, not working on the bike, but thinking through the next phase of my plan. Lydia was probably upstairs right now, either on the phone with Travis or texting her best friend Sasha Lynn, the newly appointed COO who'd been whispering poison in Lydia's ear for months. They'd be celebrating, planning their next moves, dividing up responsibilities in their brave new world. What they didn't know was that I'd already moved the most lucrative client contracts to subsidiary companies I controlled. What they didn't know was that Margaret Lowell, the board chairwoman who delivered my supposed termination notice with such theatrical flair, had been feeding me information about their coup attempt for weeks. What they didn't know was that their celebration tonight would be the last genuine moment of happiness they'd experience for a very long time. I finished my beer, cleaned my tools, and headed inside. The house was dark, except for the light under Lydia's home office door. I could hear her voice, animated and victorious, probably giving Travis a play-by-play of the boardroom scene. In our bedroom, I packed a small bag. Starting tomorrow, I'd be staying at my downtown apartment, the one Lydia didn't know I'd kept after we moved in together. She'd assume I was licking my wounds, planning my exit from her life and her company. She'd be half right. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made everything feel possible. I was in my downtown apartment, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise paint the city gold, when my phone started buzzing with the first wave of chaos. Margaret Lowell's text came at 7:30. Emergency board meeting. Lydia's panicking. Whatever you did, it worked. What I'd done was simple and devastating. Over the weekend, while Lydia was celebrating her victory, I'd activated clauses in our major client contracts that allowed for immediate transfer to subsidiary companies in the event of management instability. Perfectly legal, completely binding, and absolutely ruinous to Lydia's first quarter projections. Ray called at 8:15. Travis Monroe's BMW is in the parking garage at the Marriott downtown. You want me to proceed with phase 2? Do it, I said, but make it memorable. By 9 o'clock, I was in my own car, following Ray's van to the upscale club where Fairchild Ventures' management team liked to unwind after particularly stressful days. Travis's BMW was parked in the covered garage, gleaming black paint reflecting the fluorescent lights like a mirror. Ray had come prepared. 2 buckets of fish guts from the wholesale market, courtesy of his cousin who ran a restaurant supply business. The smell hit me even through the closed containers, raw, overwhelming, the kind of stench that would take professional detailing to eliminate. You sure about this? Ray asked, pulling on rubber gloves. This is pretty juvenile, even for corporate warfare. I thought about Travis's smug face in the boardroom, the way he'd nodded along when Margaret delivered my termination notice, knowing he'd be warming my wife's bed before the sun went down. Juvenile? Maybe. Effective? Absolutely. Do it, I said. We worked quickly and quietly. Fish guts under the door handles, in the air vents, coating the windshield wipers, filling the gaps around the windows. The smell would hit him the moment he opened the door, and it would linger for weeks. Ray finished by tucking a note under the windshield wiper. You stink at business and everything else. The security camera in the corner caught my silhouette as we left, but the angle was wrong for facial recognition. Just enough for gossip, not enough for evidence. My phone rang as we drove away. Margaret Lowell, her voice tight with barely controlled amusement. Dorian, dear, you need to get down to the office. Lydia's having what can only be described as a complete meltdown. She's demanding to know why 3 of our biggest clients have terminated their contracts. I'm sure she'll figure it out, I said. She's very clever. Not clever enough, apparently. She's trying to call your father-in-law, but Edwin's not taking her calls. Something about teaching lessons the hard way. The general. I'd wondered when he'd make his position clear. Edwin Fairchild hadn't built a multi-million-dollar company by coddling incompetent executives, even if they were his daughter. Especially if they were his daughter. I arrived at Fairchild Ventures at 10:30, walking through the lobby like I owned the place, which, technically, I did. The receptionist gave me a nervous smile, clearly confused about whether I still worked there or not. The elevator ride to the executive floor gave me time to compose myself, to slip into the role I'd be playing for the foreseeable future: the wounded husband, the displaced executive, the man who'd underestimated his wife's ambition and paid the price. Lydia's new corner office, my former corner office, had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She was pacing behind the massive oak desk, phone pressed to her ear, her usually perfect hair showing signs of stress-induced finger combing. "Daddy, please, just call me back," she was saying. "I need to understand what's happening with these contracts." She looked up when I knocked on the open door, and for a moment I saw something I'd never seen in Lydia's eyes before: genuine fear. "Dorian." She ended the call abruptly. "What are you doing here?" "Cleaning out my personal items," I said, settling into one of the leather chairs across from her desk. "Unless you object to your former husband retrieving his belongings?" "Former husband?" Her voice climbed an octave. "We're not divorced, Dorian. We're not even separated. Give it time." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to read my expression, looking for cracks in my composure. Good luck with that. 8 years of marriage to Lydia had taught me to school my features better than any poker player. "The Morrison account terminated this morning," she said finally. "So did Blackstone Industries and the Peterson Group. That's 40% of our revenue, Dorian. 40%. I made a sympathetic noise. "That's unfortunate. Have you considered that maybe they lost confidence in the new management? New management that includes the founder's daughter and his hand-picked successor?" "Hand-picked by whom?" I asked. "Because I don't recall Edwin having much say in the board's decision to terminate my position." Lydia's face flushed. She'd always hated being reminded that her father's approval didn't automatically translate to corporate authority. "You're enjoying this," she said. "I'm processing it," I corrected. 8 years of marriage, 6 years of building this company together, and you couldn't even give me the courtesy of a private conversation before you had me escorted out like a common criminal." "You weren't escorted out. You left voluntarily. After being humiliated in front of the entire board." Lydia sat down heavily in her chair, my chair, and for a moment she looked almost vulnerable. Almost. "It wasn't personal, Dorian. It was business." "Everything is personal, Lydia. You should have learned that from your father." My phone buzzed with a text from Ray. "Package delivered. Travis found his car 20 minutes ago, currently on his 3rd attempt to call you." I stood up, straightening my jacket. "I should let you get back to your crisis management. I'm sure you'll figure out how to replace 40% of the company's revenue by the end of the week." "Dorian, wait." I paused at the door. "We can work this out," she said. "You and me, the company, all of it. We don't have to be enemies." I looked back at her, sitting behind that massive desk in her power suit and her desperation, and felt something cold settle in my chest. "We were never friends, Lydia. We were just two people who wanted different things and thought we could use each other to get them. The difference is, I actually succeeded." Travis was waiting by my car when I reached the parking garage, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his expensive suit rumpled. The smell of fish guts clung to him like a cloud. "You son of a—" he started. "Careful," I said, clicking my key fob. "We're in a public place. Wouldn't want anyone to think you can't control your temper." He stepped closer, and I could see the rage in his eyes, the frustration of a man who'd been outmaneuvered and humiliated. Travis Monroe was used to being the alpha, the guy who got the girl and the promotion and the corner office. He wasn't used to being made to look like a fool. "I know it was you," he said. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The car, the fish, the note. Very mature, Dorian." I opened my car door and paused. "You know what's not mature, Travis? Sleeping with another man's wife and then celebrating when that man loses his job. But hey, we all have different standards." His face went red. For a moment, I thought he might actually take a swing at me, which would have been interesting. Travis had the build of his former quarterback days, but I'd kept myself in shape through daily workouts and weekend boxing sessions. More importantly, I'd been trained to fight by people who understood that violence was a tool, not an emotion. But Travis was smarter than his anger. He stepped back, straightened his tie, and tried to reassemble his professional demeanor. "This isn't over," he said. "No," I agreed. "It's not." By Wednesday, the cracks in Lydia's new empire were showing. Ray had been monitoring their communications, legally, through a contact at their internet service provider who owed me a favor from my consulting days. Lydia, Travis, and Sasha were burning through their emergency reserves, trying to replace the lost contracts, making increasingly desperate calls to potential clients who had already been quietly warned about the instability at Fairchild Ventures. I was in my apartment, reviewing the surveillance reports, when Margaret Lowell called with an update that made me smile for the first time in days. "Your wife tried to freeze your personal bank accounts this morning," she said. "Apparently she's under the impression that spousal privilege extends to corporate warfare." "How'd that work out for her?" "About as well as you'd expect. The accounts are in your name, funded by your consulting contracts, and protected by a prenuptial agreement that her own lawyer drafted. She's also been calling board members, trying to arrange a vote of no confidence against me." Margaret Lowell was 78 years old, had been running corporate boards since before Lydia was born, and possessed the kind of refined ruthlessness that came from decades of dealing with entitled executives who thought their last name or their connections made them untouchable. "Are you worried?" I asked. "Darling, I've survived 3 recessions, 2 corporate takeovers, and a hostile audit by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Your wife's tantrum is barely registering as a minor inconvenience." That afternoon, I drove to the office building that housed Fairchild Ventures and parked across the street, watching the executive parking garage through binoculars. At 4:30, Travis emerged from the building, still walking with the careful gait of a man trying not to breathe through his nose. His car had been professionally cleaned, but some smells have a way of lingering. He was on his phone, voice animated with anger and frustration. I couldn't hear the words, but his body language told the story. Gesturing wildly, pacing in small circles, running his free hand through his hair. Classic signs of a man whose carefully constructed world was falling apart. My phone rang. "Ray, I've got something you need to see," he said. "Can you meet me at the coffee shop on 5th Street? 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Ray in a corner booth, looking at a manila folder thick with photographs and documents. "Travis Monroe's financial records," Ray said, keeping his voice low. "Turns out your wife's boyfriend has been skimming from his expense account for the past 2 years. Nothing major, just enough to fund his lifestyle. Hotel rooms, dinners, gifts for Lydia that she probably thinks he's paying for out of his own pocket." I flipped through the photographs. Credit card receipts, bank statements, hotel registrations. A pattern of small-scale embezzlement that would be enough to destroy Travis's career and possibly land him in legal trouble. "How'd you get these?" "Travis has a weakness for expensive restaurants and attractive waitresses. One of them happens to be my cousin's daughter. She's been photographing his receipts for the past month." "And Lydia doesn't know about the skimming?" "No indication that she does, but here's the interesting part." Ray leaned forward, tapping a bank statement. "Travis has been moving money into a separate account. Looks like he's planning his own exit strategy." I studied the numbers. $50,000, transferred in small amounts over the past 6 months. Enough for a man to disappear if his current situation became untenable. "He's getting ready to run," I said. "That's my read. Question is, does he take Lydia with him, or does he leave her holding the bag?" I thought about that. Travis Monroe was fundamentally selfish, the kind of man who would sacrifice anyone to save himself. If Fairchild Ventures collapsed, if the embezzlement came to light, if his wife found out about the affair, he'd abandon Lydia without a second thought. "He'll run alone," I said. "But not yet. He'll wait until he's extracted everything he can from the situation." "So, what's the play?" I closed the folder and slid it back across the table. We wait. Let them dig themselves deeper. Let Lydia burn through more resources trying to save the company. Let Travis get more desperate and make bigger mistakes. And then we remind them that sometimes the person you underestimate is the one who destroys you. That evening, I was at my boxing gym, working the heavy bag with the kind of focused intensity that came from having too much anger and not enough outlets for it. The gym was nearly empty, just me, the night manager, and a couple of serious fighters preparing for upcoming matches. I was midway through my third round when I noticed Travis Monroe walk in. He'd changed clothes since I'd seen him in the parking garage, trading his business suit for workout gear that looked expensive and barely used. He stood near the entrance for a moment, scanning the gym until his eyes found me. I finished my combination and stepped back from the bag, pulling off my gloves. "This is unexpected," I said. Travis approached slowly, hands at his sides, trying to project calm confidence. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept flicking to the exits. "We need to talk," he said. "Do we?" "This has gone far enough, Dorian. The car, the contracts, whatever game you're playing, it needs to stop." I unwrapped my hands, taking my time with the process. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the sound of someone working the speed bag in the far corner of the gym. "What game?" I asked finally. "Don't insult my intelligence. I know you're behind the client defections. I know you had something to do with my car. I know you're trying to sabotage Lydia's position as CEO. That's a lot of assumptions, Travis. You might want to be careful about making accusations you can't prove." He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with the lingering trace of fish guts that no amount of professional cleaning could completely eliminate. "I can make things very difficult for you," he said. "Harassment charges, restraining orders, civil suits for corporate sabotage. You might want to think about whether this is really the path you want to go down." I looked at him for a long moment, this man who'd been sleeping with my wife while sitting in corporate meetings and pretending to be my colleague. Travis Monroe, who thought his college quarterback background and his sales numbers made him intimidating, who'd probably never been in a real fight in his life. "You know what your problem is, Travis?" I said, stepping closer. "You think this is about business. You think this is about corporate politics or hurt feelings or wounded pride. Isn't it? No. This is about respect, and you've never understood the difference." Before he could respond, I turned and walked toward the locker room. Behind me, I could hear him breathing hard, probably trying to decide whether to follow me or cut his losses. He chose to follow. The locker room was empty, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the smell of disinfectant and sweat heavy in the air. I sat down on one of the benches and started packing my gear into my gym bag. "I'm not going away, Dorian," Travis said, "and neither is Lydia. We're going to fight this." "Good," I said. "I was hoping you would." "Why?" I stood up, slinging my bag over my shoulder. Travis was blocking the exit, probably thinking his physical presence would be intimidating. What he didn't realize was that I'd been hoping for exactly this kind of confrontation. "Because when you fight back, you make mistakes," I said. "And when you make mistakes, you give me ammunition." I moved toward the exit, and Travis shifted to block my path more completely. For a moment, we stood there, two men in a locker room, the air thick with tension and unspoken threats. "Move," I said quietly. "Or what?" "Or you'll find out why underestimating people is such a dangerous habit." Something in my voice must have gotten through to him, because Travis stepped aside. But as I passed, he grabbed my arm. "This isn't over," he said. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. "Take your hand off me, Travis." "Or what?" "Or I'll break it." The words were spoken quietly, matter-of-factly, with the kind of calm certainty that comes from knowing exactly what you're capable of. Travis must have heard something in my tone that convinced him I wasn't bluffing, because he let go immediately. "You're making a mistake," he said as I walked away. Both of you are going to regret this. I paused at the locker room door and looked back at him. The only thing I regret, Travis, is not doing this sooner. Thursday morning brought news that made my coffee taste sweeter and my smile feel genuine for the first time in weeks. Margaret Lowell called at 8:30 with an update that confirmed everything I'd been hoping for. Emergency board meeting at 10, she said. Lydia's demanding a vote of no confidence against me, and she's threatening to sue the company for breach of fiduciary duty if we don't reinstate the terminated contracts. Can she do that? She can try, but here's the beautiful part, darling. She doesn't have the authority to call board meetings, and she certainly doesn't have the votes to remove me. What she does have is a growing reputation for instability and a rapidly shrinking client base. I was getting dressed when Ray called with his own update. Travis Monroe cleaned out his office last night, he said. Security footage shows him leaving the building at 11:30 with 3 boxes of files and his personal computer. Running already? Looks like it. But here's where it gets interesting. He didn't go home. He went to a storage unit across town, then to a hotel downtown, paid cash for a week-long stay. So Travis was positioning himself for a quick exit while maintaining plausible deniability. Smart, in a cowardly sort of way. But it also meant he was abandoning Lydia at the worst possible moment, leaving her to face the consequences of their failed coup alone. What about Sasha Lynn? Still at the company, but she's been making some interesting phone calls. Looks like she's reaching out to headhunters testing the job market. The rats were abandoning the sinking ship. Perfect. I arrived at Fairchild Ventures 30 minutes before the board meeting, using my key card to access the executive floor. Technically, I was no longer an employee, but no one had thought to deactivate my security clearance. Another oversight that spoke to how poorly planned Lydia's takeover had been. The boardroom was already set up for the meeting, with Lydia's presentation materials arranged at the head of the table. I flipped through her notes quickly, speed-reading her desperate strategy for salvaging the situation. It was exactly what I'd expected. Blame external factors, promise aggressive cost-cutting measures, and demand loyalty from the board during a difficult transition. What she didn't know was that the transition was about to become much more difficult. I was in Margaret's office when the other board members started arriving. Through the window, I could see Lydia in the hallway, pacing nervously and checking her phone every few seconds. She was dressed for battle in her most expensive suit, hair pulled back severely, makeup applied with military precision. She looks terrified, Margaret observed. She should be. At exactly 10 o'clock, Margaret led me into the boardroom. The other board members were already seated, 5 successful business people who'd worked with Edwin Fairchild for decades and had little patience for corporate drama. Lydia looked up when we entered, her face cycling through confusion, anger, and something that might have been panic. "What is he doing here?" she demanded. "Mr. Hayes requested permission to address the board," Margaret said calmly. "Given his significant contributions to this company and his unique perspective on recent events, we felt it was appropriate to hear what he has to say." I took a seat at the far end of the table, directly across from Lydia. She was staring at me with the kind of intensity that suggested she was trying to read my thoughts through sheer force of will. "Before we begin," I said, "I think the board should be aware of some information that's come to my attention regarding the company's current financial situation." I placed a folder on the table and slid it toward Margaret. Inside were copies of the contract transfers, documentation of Travis's expense account irregularities, and a detailed analysis of the revenue shortfall that Lydia's management team was facing. "What is this?" Lydia asked. "Due diligence," I said, "the kind that should have been done before making major leadership changes." Margaret opened the folder and began reading. Her expression remained neutral, but I could see her eyebrows rise slightly as she processed the information. "According to these documents," she said, "the company has lost 68% of its major client contracts in the past week, Is that accurate, Ms. Fairchild? Lydia's face flushed. The market conditions have been challenging, but we're confident that— Is it accurate? Margaret repeated. Yes, but— And Mr. Monroe's expense reports show irregularities totaling approximately $75,000 over the past 2 years. I wasn't aware of any irregularities in Travis's— Were you aware that Mr. Monroe has been systematically embezzling company funds to support a lifestyle that includes regular hotel stays and expensive dinners? The boardroom went silent. Lydia was staring at the folder like it contained a venomous snake. I don't know what Dorian has told you, she said finally, but Travis Monroe is a dedicated employee who cleaned out his office last night and is currently staying at the downtown Marriott under an assumed name, I said. Hardly the behavior of someone committed to helping the company through a difficult transition. One of the other board members, a woman named Patricia Chen, who'd known Edwin since the company's early days, leaned forward. Ms. Fairchild, are you telling us that you were unaware of your sales VP's financial irregularities and his apparent preparation to abandon the company? Lydia looked around the table, searching for allies and finding none. Travis has been under a lot of pressure. We all have. But that doesn't mean— It means, Margaret interrupted, that your first week as CEO has been characterized by massive client defections, financial irregularities among senior staff, and a complete breakdown in corporate oversight. I watched Lydia's face as the reality of her situation sank in. She'd walked into this meeting expecting to consolidate her power and eliminate opposition. Instead, she was facing a boardroom full of people who were rapidly losing confidence in her ability to lead. There's one more thing the board should know, I said. I reached into my briefcase and withdrew a second folder, this one containing copies of the incorporation documents for the shell companies that now held the majority of Fairchild Ventures' assets. What's that? Patricia asked. Proof of ownership, I said. It seems there was some confusion about the corporate structure when the recent leadership changes were made. Margaret opened the second folder and began reading. This time, her poker face slipped entirely. According to these documents, she said slowly, Mr. Hayes controls 71% of the company's voting shares through a network of subsidiary corporations established over the past 18 months. The silence in the boardroom was deafening. Lydia was staring at me with an expression of pure shock, as if I'd just revealed that I could fly or read minds. That's impossible, she whispered. It's actually quite legal, I said, and thoroughly documented. Your father was very helpful in structuring the arrangement before his retirement. My father wouldn't— Your father is a businessman first and a parent second, I said. He wanted to ensure that the company would be in competent hands regardless of family dynamics. Lydia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You can't steal a company. I didn't steal anything, I said calmly. I invested in it. I built relationships with clients. I demonstrated competence and reliability. And when the time came, I was rewarded with controlling interest by the man who founded this company. The board voted to terminate your employment. The board voted to terminate my employment, I agreed. They didn't vote to transfer my ownership stake, and as the majority shareholder, I'm now exercising my right to call for new leadership. Margaret was still reading through the documents, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was a smart woman who'd spent decades navigating corporate politics, and she could see which way the wind was blowing. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Hayes? She asked. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Travis Monroe was probably packing his bags and preparing to disappear. Somewhere else, Sasha Lynn was updating her resume and reaching out to contacts at competing firms. And in this boardroom, Lydia was finally beginning to understand that she'd been outmaneuvered from the very beginning. I'm proposing that we acknowledge reality, I said. Lydia Fairchild is not qualified to run this company. Her judgment is questionable, her oversight is inadequate, and her leadership has resulted in the loss of more than half our client base in less than a week. And you think you're qualified? Lydia's voice was shaking with anger. I turned back to face her. I think I'm the majority shareholder, which means my qualifications are irrelevant. What matters is results. You orchestrated this whole thing. You sabotaged the contracts. You drove away the clients. I protected my investment, I said. When it became clear that new management was incompetent, I took steps to minimize the damage. Patricia Chen was looking back and forth between us like she was watching a tennis match. So what happens now? Now we vote, Margaret said. All in favor of accepting Ms. Fairchild's resignation as CEO? I'm not resigning, Lydia said. Then we'll vote to remove you, Margaret replied. The result will be the same. 5 hands went up around the table. Lydia looked at each board member in turn, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that looked like genuine hurt. You can't do this to me, she said. We just did, I replied. The lake house had been in Lydia's family for 3 generations, a sprawling cabin on 20 acres of private waterfront that Edwin Fairchild had bought back when land was cheap and his company was just getting started. It was where Lydia went when she needed to think, to plan, to lick her wounds, and prepare for the next battle. It was also where she'd been meeting with Travis and Sasha for the past month, planning the corporate coup that had just collapsed around her ears. Ray had been monitoring the property since Wednesday, using long-range surveillance equipment to track the comings and goings of Lydia's inner circle. Friday evening, all 3 of them were there. Lydia's BMW, Travis's rental car, and Sasha's Lexus parked in the gravel driveway like vehicles at a funeral. They've been inside for 2 hours, Ray reported over the phone. Lights are on in the main room, and there's been a lot of animated conversation. From the body language I can see through the windows, it's not a happy reunion. I was in my apartment packing a small overnight bag and preparing for what I hoped would be the final act of this particular drama. The board meeting had gone exactly as planned. Lydia removed as CEO, Travis's embezzlement exposed, Sasha's employment terminated for cause. But I knew that none of them would accept defeat gracefully. Any sign they're planning to leave tonight? Negative. Looks like they're settling in for a long strategy session. Travis brought groceries and Sasha's got what looks like a laptop bag full of files. Perfect. Let them plot and scheme and convince themselves that they still had options. Let them work themselves into a state of desperate determination, because when people were desperate, they made mistakes. And when they made mistakes, they gave me opportunities. I'm heading out there, I said. You sure that's wise? 3 against 1, isolated location, no witnesses. I thought about that. Ray had a point. Confronting them alone at the lake house carried risks. But it also offered the kind of privacy that would allow for a completely honest conversation. The kind where people said what they really meant instead of hiding behind corporate politeness and legal euphemisms. I'll be fine, I said. These aren't dangerous people, Ray. They're just entitled people who've never had to face real consequences for their actions. Famous last words. Stay close to your phone. If you don't hear from me by midnight, call the cavalry. The drive to the lake house took 45 minutes through winding country roads that were barely visible in the darkness. I'd been there dozens of times over the years, family gatherings and holiday celebrations and quiet weekends, when Lydia and I were still pretending our marriage was built on something more substantial than mutual convenience. The house sat on a bluff overlooking the water, a massive log structure with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the lake during daylight hours. Tonight, those windows glowed with warm yellow light, and I could see figures moving around inside. I parked behind Sasha's Lexus and sat in my car for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled and watching the shadows move behind the curtains. Somewhere in that house, 3 people who'd tried to destroy my life were probably planning their next move, convinced that they could still salvage something from the wreckage of their failed coup. They were wrong. I walked up the stone pathway to the front door and knocked firmly. The conversation inside stopped abruptly, followed by the sound of footsteps and hushed voices. Lydia opened the door, and for a moment we just stared at each other. She'd changed out of her business attire into jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, makeup minimal. She looked younger somehow, more like the woman I'd married 8 years ago, and less like the corporate shark she'd become. "What are you doing here, Dorian? We need to talk." "I don't think we have anything to say to each other." Behind her, I could see Travis and Sasha sitting at the massive dining table, papers and laptops spread out like they were planning a military campaign. Travis looked up when he heard my voice, his face darkening with anger. "Let him in," he called out. "It's time we settled this once and for all." Lydia stepped aside reluctantly, and I walked into the house that had once felt like a second home. The interior was exactly as I remembered: rustic furniture, stone fireplace, family photos covering every available surface. But the atmosphere was different now, charged with tension and barely controlled hostility. "Nice strategy session," I said, looking at the papers scattered across the table. "Planning your comeback?" Sasha stood up, her laptop still open in front of her. "We're exploring our legal options." "Legal options?" I laughed. "For what? Wrongful termination? Corporate theft? Conspiracy to commit fraud?" "For the hostile takeover of a family company by someone who married into the family under false pretenses," Travis said. I walked over to the fireplace and leaned against the mantel, trying to project casual confidence while keeping all three of them in my line of sight. "False pretenses? I was pretty upfront about my intentions, Travis. I wanted to build a successful business and have a stable marriage. The fact that you decided to interfere with both of those goals is your problem, not mine." "You manipulated Edwin," Lydia said. "You convinced my father to structure the company in a way that would benefit you at my expense. Your father is a smart businessman who wanted to ensure the company's survival. He gave control to the person most likely to protect his investment. He gave control to the person who was sleeping with his daughter." The words hung in the air between us, raw and bitter, and probably more honest than anything Lydia had said to me in months. "Is that what you think this was about?" I asked. "You think I married you to get access to your father's company? Didn't you?" I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who'd shared my bed and my life, and apparently never understood either my motivations or my character. "I married you because I thought we wanted the same things," I said. "Success, stability, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared goals. What I got was a wife who viewed me as a stepping stone and a business partner who was planning to stab me in the back the moment it became convenient." Travis stood up from the table, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "You want to talk about stabbing people in the back? You destroyed my career, Dorian. You ruined my reputation, you cost me my job, and you humiliated me in front of the entire company. You were embezzling company funds and sleeping with another man's wife," I said. "I didn't destroy your career, Travis. You did that yourself." The expense account irregularities were minor. $75,000 is not minor. And the affair was consensual between two adults, one of whom was married to your business partner. Travis moved closer, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He was bigger than me, probably stronger, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He wanted to be intimidating, but he wasn't sure he could back it up if things turned physical. "You think you've won," he said. "You think you've outsmarted all of us and come out on top. But this isn't over, Dorian. We're going to fight this." "With what?" I asked. "You don't have jobs, you don't have money, and you don't have legal standing. What exactly are you going to fight with?" Sasha closed her laptop and stood up. "We have information." "What kind of information?" "The kind that could make things very uncomfortable for you if it became public." I looked at her. This woman who'd been whispering poison in Lydia's ear for months, encouraging her worst instincts and feeding her resentment. Sasha Lin had always been the smartest of the three, the one most likely to have a backup plan. Are you trying to blackmail me, Sasha? I'm trying to find a solution that works for everyone. I'm listening. She walked over to her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with documents and photographs. Financial records, email correspondence, meeting notes, recordings of private conversations. Everything documenting your systematic campaign to undermine Lydia's authority and sabotage the company's operations. All of which was perfectly legal. Legal, maybe, but how would it look to your clients, to the business community, to Edwin Fairchild when he finds out that his son-in-law destroyed his daughter's career out of spite? I took the envelope and flipped through its contents quickly. Bank statements, email printouts, photographs of me meeting with Ray, transcripts of phone conversations. It was comprehensive, well-organized, and absolutely useless. This is impressive work, I said. Very thorough. There's just one problem. What's that? None of it matters. I walked over to the fireplace and tossed the envelope onto the burning logs. The papers caught immediately, flames consuming months of careful documentation in a matter of seconds. You can't just, Sasha started. I just did. And you know why I can do that? Because I don't care what people think about my methods. I care about results. Lydia was staring at the burning papers with an expression of pure shock. You're destroying evidence. I'm destroying irrelevant documents. The only evidence that matters is the corporate paperwork showing that I own 71% of Fairchild Ventures. Everything else is just noise. Travis moved closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne and see the anger burning in his eyes. You son of a... He swung at me, a wild right hook that telegraphed itself from across the room. I ducked easily, letting his momentum carry him past me, then grabbed his arm and used his own weight to send him stumbling into the wall. Bad idea, Travis. He bounced off the wall and came at me again, this time with more control but no more skill. I caught his wrist, twisted his arm behind his back, and pushed him face first against the stone fireplace. Let him go, Lydia shouted. When he stops trying to hit me, I said calmly. Travis was breathing hard, his cheek pressed against the rough stone, his arm bent at an uncomfortable angle behind his back. You're finished, Dorian. We're going to destroy you. With what? Your blackmail material just went up in smoke. Your careers are over. Your reputations are ruined. What exactly are you going to destroy me with? I released his arm and stepped back. Travis straightened slowly, rubbing his shoulder and glaring at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, he said. Yes, I said. It is. I looked around the room at the three people who'd tried to destroy my life and my business. Lydia standing by the dining table with tears in her eyes. Travis, disheveled and humiliated, nursing his bruised pride and his twisted arm. Sasha, calculating and cold, probably already planning her next move. Here's what's going to happen, I said. Lydia, you're going to file for divorce. The prenuptial agreement will protect both of our assets, so you'll walk away with everything you brought into the marriage. Travis, you're going to disappear. Take your embezzled money and start over somewhere else, because if I see you again, I'll have you prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Sasha, you're going to find a new career, preferably in a different industry, because I'll make sure every company in this city knows exactly why you were terminated. And if we don't agree to your terms, Sasha asked, then things get much worse for all of you. I have resources you can't imagine, connections you've never heard of, and a very long memory for people who cross me. I walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at them one final time. You wanted to know what kind of man you were dealing with, I said. Now you know. Outside, the night air was cold and clean, carrying the scent of pine trees and lake water. I walked to my car slowly, listening for sounds of pursuit, or continued confrontation from inside the house. There were none. My phone buzzed with a text from Ray. "Everything okay?" I typed back, "It's over." And it was. Lydia would file for divorce within the week. Travis would disappear, probably to another state where his reputation hadn't preceded him. Sasha would find work at a smaller firm, her ambitions permanently scaled back by the reality of her situation. And I would rebuild Fairchild Ventures into something better than it had been before, something worthy of Edwin's legacy and my own vision. I started the car and drove away from the lake house, leaving behind 8 years of marriage and the illusion that some people could be trusted with power they hadn't earned. The road ahead was dark, but I knew exactly where I was going,